The Iowa caucuses are the first electoral event in the gruelling US presidential race that won't end until polling day in November. And with an incumbent Democrat in the White House, political tragics have been glued to the Republican campaign to nominate a challenger to Barack Obama. Today's vote was one of the tightest contests in Iowa history. When the final tally was declared in the wee small hours of the morning, Conservative darling Rex Santorum had lost by 8 votes to moderate former Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney. But there are many, many contests ahead. Robert Reich has a lifetime of experience in US politics. He was Secretary for Labor in the Clinton era and is now Professor for Public Policy at the University of California, Berkeley. I spoke with him earlier. Robert Reich, welcome to 7:30.
Delighted.
Is it your expectation that the former Governor of Massachusetts will eventually emerge as the party's candidate? Because what's typified this contest so far is people who flare up briefly and then flame out.
Yes, those hopefuls who flame up briefly and then flame out are all on the right side of the Republican Party. They are very conservative. The Tea Partiers, that's what they're called. The Tea Partiers have been searching for a replacement, a kind of competitor for Romney, a right-wing version of Romney who they suspect is a little bit too moderate for their taste.
Is it the fact that Mitt Romney is a moderate that's so offensive to some Republicans, or the fact that he's a Mormon?
Both. I think that many Iowa Republicans are offended by the fact that Romney has flip-flopped on a number of issues. He was governor of Massachusetts at a time when Massachusetts enacted, with Romney's blessing, a health care law that is very similar to the national health care law that Republicans are screaming about, that was Obama's initiative. Romney's religion also is a factor, particularly among evangelical Christians and some others.
You've spoken about Mitt Romney's genuine achievements when he was governor of Massachusetts on healthcare reform. That's a position that he's had to recant. That's something that's typified this campaign again, and that is that genuinely strongly held positions have been recanted. We've seen it from Mitt Romney. We've seen it also from Newt Gingrich on climate change.
You're absolutely right. Every Republican who is running has had to shift ground somewhat to the right. And most of them started pretty far over on the right to begin with, but they've had to shift ground to the right even more so to accommodate the extreme right in the Republican Party, which is going to make it all the more difficult for one of them in the general election to move very rapidly back to the center, because the extreme right is so far from the center, and you've got to be at or near the center to attract the votes of independents. And most Americans are neither Democrats nor Republicans. They consider themselves independent.
You've written recently of the no-compromise wing of the Republican Party, and this time in the incarnation of the Tea Party, and you say that it's a tradition that stretches back in American politics all the way to 1861.
Yes, it's no accident that the majority of members of the Tea Party caucus in Congress, that is, those representatives who are identified and identify themselves as Tea Partiers, a majority come from southern states, the former Confederacy, or from border states surrounding the former Confederacy. And these are people, and this is a legacy that is not compromising. And we saw it in 1861, all the way back then. They did not compromise. They went into war. We had a civil war over their uncompromising stance. Many of them come from the same political tradition that bucked Reconstruction, that did not want the North to give Southern blacks, African Americans, the rights that they were entitled to as American citizens after the Civil War. These same Southerners, most of them white, most of them male, many of them rural, most of them from the South, they also were very much against the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1965. This is the same group that came to prominence with Newt Gingrich in 1995, people who became the head of the Republican Party in Congress. They closed the government down because they didn't get their way.
Of course, the reason that all this matters to us from the remoteness of Australia is that the United States is still the world's largest economy, and who runs it matters very much indeed. So do you expect that this contest will, in the end, be one between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney?
Yes, I do. I would be very surprised if anybody other than Mitt Romney took the Republican mantle. I think Barack Obama and Mitt Romney will be both the nominees of their respective parties. I'll go a step further, stick my neck way out, and say that I would suspect that the vice president on the candidate on the Democratic ticket will be Hillary Clinton. That she will trade places with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden, who now is the vice president, will become Secretary of State. I say this, by the way, on the basis of no inside information. This is just pure conjecture on my part based upon my knowledge of American politics. And on the Republican side, I would guess, and again, this is a very early guess. If I'm right, I want some credit on your show. I would guess that the vice presidential candidate, along with Romney, is a man named Marco Rubio, who is now the junior senator from the state of Florida.
Your latest book, Aftershock, talks about the United States after the global financial crisis. Do you think that this campaign inevitably will coalesce around who is best able to manage the US economy?
Many Americans are in very deep financial trouble. And basically all they want is for somebody to fix the economy. Barack Obama's biggest challenge is going to be to overcome cynicism and skepticism about his ability to be the steward of the economy, because even though he inherited a terrible economy from George W. Bush, most people say, well, you know, you've been president for almost 4 years, and even though you inherited a terrible economy, you should have been able to fix it by now. Now, it's one thing for Barack Obama to say, well, the Republicans wouldn't let me. That's truthful. That's a truthful answer, but it's not. It may not be enough for many voters.
But what kind of economic policies are we likely to see out of the United States? We might describe the president as the most powerful man in the world, but it appears that when it comes to running the US economy, sometimes he's quite powerless.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And if you have the Republicans taking over the Senate, which right now seems quite likely, and you have, even if the Democrats regain control of the House of Representatives, nonetheless, it's going to be very difficult for President Obama to take much new initiative with regard to the economy. The most important thing he can do, in my view, he should do, is expand fiscal policy, public spending. When the private sector is unwilling and unable to spend, when consumers are essentially pulling in from the market and not willing or able to spend, then you've got to regard and look to government as the spender of last resort. Otherwise, there's not enough demand in the system.
And what about the economic credentials of Mitt Romney? Even if he becomes the President of the United States, won't the compromises that he's had to make to get there severely limit what he can do?
Well, you see, that's the problem. I don't think he would be allowed to do so. Mitt Romney will be campaigning on the basis that he's a former businessman and he understands, therefore he says he understands the economy and he can whip the economy into shape. But if he's not allowed, by virtue of the promises he's made and also his own party, to have an expansive fiscal policy, then all he really is able to do is to continue to shrink the projected budget deficit, which, again, is unlikely to get the United States out of its doldrums.
You've already made some predictions about who you expect to be on the ticket come November. Who do you expect to win the contest?
I think it's going to be a close call. If the United States economy, as I expect it will, stays flat, does not show much growth or much reduction in unemployment, then Romney has, I think, a fairly decent chance. Now, an incumbent president always has the benefits of incumbency, has what President Teddy Roosevelt called the bully pulpit. He can attract attention in a way that a challenger cannot. But an incumbent president who is presiding over a terrible economy has a great burden, and Romney will take every advantage of that, I'm sure. On the other hand, if the American economy starts to grow, if the direction over the next year is positive, even if the absolute numbers, the amount of unemployment and the amount of distress are quite high, but if the direction looks like it's moving correctly in the minds of most Americans, they may forgive the bad economy, but they may say, well, Obama has finally set us on the right course, and we'll vote for him.
Professor Reich, thank you.
Thank you for asking me.